Are you struggling in seclusion? Is lockdown making you loopy? Reports are coming in from all over the globe of people suffering everything from mental abstraction to complete and utter delusion as a result of what scientists are now referring to as pandemic pottiness. Symptoms include everything from absent-mindedness, erratic mood swings, a complete inability to remember on which day the bins go out, which day it is now, and God help you if you have refuse and recycling going out on different weeks. Other more acute cases have seen usually committed and sensible people driven to distraction, finding solace in the strangest of things, but experts all agree that
they really can't be held accountable for their actions. Hello there, Pickles, and welcome to episode 44 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I'm a knitter living here in lockdown London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a huge hello and welcome to you. I do like to give a little warning up front, which is to say that this is a swearing-friendly podcast. Yes, the language, it can get a little bit colourful at times, and so if that's not your bag, I completely appreciate it. However, this probably won't be the podcast for you. That said, if you're happy to endure the swearing, or indeed if you flat out enjoy it, I am delighted to welcome you here. That goes alike for those of you who are coming back, whether you be long-time viewers or indeed a little bit more recent. It is wonderful to have you here, and I really do hope you're all well. Yes, indeed, lockdown London, although lockdown does seem to be not quite easing, but at the very least we're starting to see a little light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So yes, in the last few weeks we've been under fairly strict stay-at-home orders. That being said, it now looks as though we're starting to perhaps ease up on that a little bit, with some of the critical workers starting to be encouraged to go back to their day jobs. Obviously, hopefully everyone who is doing so is staying safe and healthy, and for those of you who either are doing so or indeed have family members doing the same, I really do hope that all is well with you. Likewise to those care workers and key workers who are continuing to do such a sterling effort out on the very much front line. Thank you so much. Your hard work and efforts are much appreciated, and yes, fingers crossed this easing will continue to stand us in very good stead, and obviously the situation is being monitored as best it can for any changes in rates of infection and whatnot. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of you out there who come to this for a little bit of escapism, so I'm not going to dwell on this too much other than to say thank you so much to everyone. I hope you're all well and healthy, and everything here is pretty much okay. Thank you so much for your consideration. Yes, it's a life of continued video calls over here at the moment, whether that be for work or indeed whether it be for socialising and for pleasure. There is a huge amount of time that is being spent interacting with laptop screens right now. I hope you're dealing with it as best you can. I am certainly kind of getting used to it, but also getting really tediously bored by it. I think it's fair to say that there are certainly moments when I'm feeling a little bit more digital hermit than I would do otherwise, which is just the sheer amount of screen time that I have and interactions with people. From a digital perspective, it's really starting to drain my desire to want to spend, you know, kind of personal time doing much the same thing. So yeah, we're getting there with it. We're getting there with it. I think it's probably fair to say that the kind of adoption of digital services has come on leaps and bounds within the last few months, which has both positives and negatives associated with it. But definitely, if you are spending a lot of time in front of a screen and trying to work out the kind of social nuances of, well, that person has their camera switched on, that person has their camera switched off, does that mean they're not paying attention? That person looks as though he might be reading something, I'm not presenting anything that should be being read. That whole kind of thing at the moment, where you're trying to read the room without being in a room, or indeed having any real parameters to base that reading against, you're not alone. It is bending my mind as well, and fingers crossed we'll see a day where we're actually in a physical room presenting to actual physical people and all will be right with the world again. But until that time, Microsoft Teams and all of its foibles, we're just going to have to learn to live with it. As you may have gathered from that little section up front, pandemic brain is definitely a thing right now. Now, I know I'm not alone in this. I take great comfort from knowing that this short time battiness has been very much shared and experienced fairly widely. It does mean that this week's content is a little bit more, I'm going to say, diverse. Another word could be subversive. A third word could be bizarre. But let's go with diverse for a change. Yes, indeed, because the plans that I had, all of those well-laid plans that I was talking to you about before, about, you know, sweaters that are pretty much off the needles and so on. Yeah, there really is no accounting for the extent to which any kind of like pandemic or just weird situation is enough to make my brain go, ooh, shiny thing. I think essentially what I've discovered is that in solitude I am becoming a squirrel. Even more of a squirrel, and when you have quite the colourful stash to play in, those tendencies are definitely elevated. So yes, I make a slight apology for that, and yet at the same time I am loving it, and we will talk more about that momentarily. But just before we do get into that, it would be remiss of me not to remind you that we do have the Knitting Vicariously podcast account over on Ravelry. That is where you will find information not only about this week's episode alongside the show notes, which you will also find in the description box below. You will also find a plethora of groups and topics and general chatter about all things yarn related, because we have a wonderfully active group over there, and you can find us by searching for Knitting Vicariously podcast group in the groups tab on Ravelry. You will also be able to find a little bit more information over on the Instagram page. I have the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account in addition to my own personal account, which is where I will include links and hashtags for all of the relevant makers and projects that we talk about on this week's episode. That should hopefully make your Instagram stalking that little bit easier, and let's face it, scrolling through Instagram is one of life's great pleasures right now, so you're welcome. I will mention briefly up front a little bit of actual knitting in the form of what it is that I am wearing. This here is my Felix pullover. It is a sweater that I knit at the tail end of last year, I believe. This is knit from Rhinebeck yarn, Rhinebeck 2019 yarn, because I was feeling even so slightly bit efficient about using up some of the yarn that I purchased when I was out in the US, and I really love this sweater. It gets quite a lot of wear. It is the Felix pullover by Amy Christoffers. I will put her pattern picture up here on the screen just now for you to enjoy. It is a very well-known pattern. I believe it came out sometime last year. I have friends that have knit multiple versions of this. Emily, I am looking at you. I covet all of them, and indeed I know that again it's been such a well-loved pattern, and with very good reason. Part of that is down to the fact it's knit in fairly heavyweight yarn. It's knit, I think it's a recommended Aran weight, but worsted weight, or even some particularly sort of big, I want to say sort of slightly fluffy or like woolen spun DK weight could even do the trick. It could be quite drapey and lovely. This version I knit from Jill Draper's Mini Empire in the lipstick colorway, Lipstick Heathers colorway, and you can see it is this beautifully sort of heathered burgundy pink color. I absolutely adore it. I will stand up to give you a little more of a better look at it, and at some point I will organize those words into an order that makes sense to anyone and not just me. And so here we have the Felix pullover and indeed the customary Felix boobs. Yes, this is the pattern that I knit towards the end of last year. You can see here one of my favourite details about it is the little lace eyelets that you get alongside the raglan shaping. It is on both the front and the back of the sleeve and adds just a really lovely bit of detail when it comes to working up that yoke. You can see that there is a lovely neckband on here. I have used a tubular cast on. Yes, indeed. Actually, no. That, I think I might tell a lie. I can't remember if I used a tubular cast on or an alternating cable cast on. I will need to double check that. I know that I used a tubular bind off on the hem and on the sleeves because, you know, fancy, that's me. I will leave a link to the video that I used for that in the comment section and the description box below. But yes, you can see that it hits me pretty much bang on high hip, mid hip, which is my sweater length of choice. There is a slight difference between a couple of the skeins that I used in here. I think I did alternate for some of it, but I know that there is a very slight difference. What I will say though is that looks far more obvious on the camera than it does in reality. The camera is actually blowing out the colour ever so slightly because the lighting in here is a little bit strange today. We're having sunny spells. If that's of interest to you, I will confess that I know Amy Florence is the one who is the weatherer of all of our knitting podcasting joy, but she lives in Scotland now, so she can't tell you my weather. So my weather is sunny spells. There you go. Anyway, so yes, you would not necessarily be able to see quite such a strong distinction if you were to see me in person, but also if that is what you were staring at, then more fool you. So yes, this is my Felix pullover. I will confess it is a little bit warm to be wearing this. It's been warmer the last few days. It has been high 20s at one point, which was insane. I know that my friends over in the US have had snow. Sorry about that. It is a lot cooler today. I want to say it's around about kind of 15, 16 degrees Celsius. I'm not even going to try and translate that into Fahrenheit anymore. I think we've established I'm rubbish at that. You do you. If you want to know, there's Google, there's Alexa, there's all the things. I just don't. Maths and stuff and yeah, no. But yes, tiny bit on the warm side to be wearing this, but I'm going to struggle on through. So yeah, that is pretty much it. Now I know that I talked about this a lot more on episode 34. I will leave it to you should you wish to go back and find out a little bit more about it. I will also include a link to my Ravelry project page below. I know that I knit the size 48 inch. My gauge was a little bit on the small side, so it's come out to roughly a 45 inch in terms of the final measurements for it. I know that I want to knit at least one more of these. I have some more of this fabulous yarn which is holding up really well. There is a tiny bit of pilling on the inside of this sleeve, but I will say that I have worn this sweater a lot, and I'm pretty sure that if I went over that with a sort of de-piller or gleaner that I'd be able to get rid of that and the whole thing would be looking as good as new. So I have more of this yarn in the leaf colourway, which is a beautiful like medium green, heathery gorgeousness, love it. And I also picked up some DK weight wool from Unravel earlier on this year, which I believe I talked about in that episode too. So definitely keen to make at least one more of these because it's just such a fabulously functional and lovely piece of knitwear to have in my wardrobe. Definitely recommend you taking a look at it if you haven't already done so. I also think this could be beginner friendly enough for you to be knitting your first sweater with this. The only fiddly bits are going to be the cast-ons, the bind-offs. You could always do a long tail cast-on instead if you're not comfortable doing the tubular bind-off or cast-on, and so instead just make it a really simple, straightforward sweater to knit. But definitely a big recommendation from my side. But yes, there's really no getting away from it. I am going to have to sidle my way gently into actual knitting. So bit of a misnomer with this one. So I finished up the last episode and I said, hey, you know, I've knit the body of one sweater, I've knit the sleeves of another. I reckon I can have at least one of these done for the next podcast. Ooh, yeah. And then didn't work on either of them. Like, at all. At all. They sat to one side and I looked at them every now and again and went, oh yeah, gonna work on you. Nope. Because squirrel. That's apparently where I'm coming from with all this. You know, I had really good intentions. I really want both of the jumpers. I want the sorrel and I want the morning in Engelberg, and you know, they both be really pretty, and the sorrel is going to be too hot to wear right now and a tiny bit smaller than I was going for, but that's not the jumper that's smaller, it's me that is a little bit wider post-quarantine. But at the same time, you know, I really do want those sweaters. I just didn't want to work on them, like at all. Because do you know what I wanted to work on? Yeah, crochet. Yep. Nope, I have no idea where that came from. Not the foggiest. Not the foggiest. But here we very much are. So those of you who've been around for a little while may remember that a couple of years ago I had a Nora George advent calendar. I do love Tracy's advent calendars. I know there's quite a few of them that are taking different kind of orders and are starting to look at opening up slots for calendars for this year. It's definitely something I would recommend you taking a look at, both Tracy's and other dyers that are out there as well, if it's something that you like the sound of and it's something you're able to afford. It's great. You get to open up a little package of yarn every day in the run up to Christmas. What's not to love? And I was acquiring quite a few minis, and a couple of years ago I thought to myself, oh, I'm gonna crochet a blanket, because I've never really crocheted before. What could possibly go wrong? And so I started, and it became a very, very long-term project, in the sense that I would pick it up once every few months, crochet a few rows of it, and then would put it back down again and kind of back in your box, off you go, back to the knitting. Not because I don't enjoy crochet as much, but just because I'm really not very good at it. My knowledge is fairly limited to blankets, and particularly triple crochet stitches, double crochet if you're in the US, or the other way around. I never remember. But it's my skills in that whole department are incredibly narrow, shall we say. But that being said, it was lovely and meditative and a great way of using up minis and scraps and so on. And so I started my crochet blanket. Now, I showed that a good few episodes ago, and since then it's been getting a little bit of love intermittently. There's been a few more kind of colours that I've put into it, and a couple of weeks ago, just after the last podcast, I picked it up again. And I managed to work up like 20 colours, which is 40 rows, which is bonkers. But it was what I wanted to work on at that point in time. So I'm going to endeavour to hold it up. Of course, it's a blanket, and that makes it very difficult for you to see anything what's going on here. But let me endeavour to do just that. So we have here, I know, isn't it fun? We have here a section of crochet blanket where up to, up to about, let me think, this green section here is where I think I finished up with the previous advent calendar, and so all of the colours since then have been added a little bit more recently. So what you may be able to see from here is that I am using one colour for 2 rows back and forth, putting in all of these little triple crochets. You may recognise some of the yarns on here. In fact, if I can hold this properly, this lovely kind of gold with the pink speckles that's in here, this is left over from the Dusty Dimples yarn that I knit socks out of last year. Similarly, this lovely peachy colourway here is leftovers from one of the newborn vertebrae cardigans that I knit for my friend's little one. And likewise, just below that, the sort of colourway that's here just below that navy is also leftovers. That is leftover from the flax light jumper that I knit for her as well. So lots of leftovers and scraps that have gone into this, and lots of mini skeins as well. I won't go through each and every one of them because honestly I can't remember what most of them are. But this has been fantastic and very meditative. Now, I don't quite know why I have just kind of really focused my brain on crochet at the moment. I'm not really sure what it is when it comes to this blanket. More on that in a second. What I will say, however, is this is a pattern called Granny Stripes. It is by Lucy of Attic 24. It is pretty much the eponymous blanket pattern that everyone uses for the aforementioned Granny Stripe blankets. I'm folding this because I'm going to try and show it to you in its entirety, but it is now quite long. So, one moment. Alrighty, I am trying to fold this and hold it in such a way where you'll be able to see it. But so we've got the rows that I've done most recently up here at the top, all the way down to the end of one of the Advent yarns. I'm pretty sure this was the Homespun House Advent calendar from 2017, I believe. And then from here all the way down to I believe this is the start of that Homespun House advent calendar, possibly a couple of rows below. And then we keep going down. Actually, no, sorry, I tell a lie. That's the start of the Homespun House advent calendar, because these are all the scraps of sock yarn. And then here, this red is the end of my kind of scraps, which are all that section there. This red then goes into Tracy's advent calendar, who is Nora George, all the way down to the very bottom. So from the bottom up, I worked Nora George advent calendar, which was up to that pinkish red there. Then we've got some scraps that I talked about in a previous podcast episode. And then from here on up, let me pull that off my arm, to about here, it's a Homespun House, and then from the purple on up, this is scraps that I've worked up fairly recently. And I'm back. So I have somewhere in the region of about 80 rows, or colours rather, in that blanket just now, which is about 160 rows. I reckon, having sort of laid it up along my bed and so on, I reckon I can probably get away with another 20 colours, which is another 40 rows. That shouldn't take me too much longer. I've got plenty of minis. I find that to do 2 rows, so I think initially I chained somewhere in the region of 300, 330-ish stitches, and then work triple crochets into there. I reckon for each double row it takes about 12-13 grams of yarn, I think. So I do end up with a fairly sort of decent sized mini that's left over from a 20-gram mini skein, and you know, I've got a few odds and sods and odds and ends, but obviously being so close to the end now, it's a really strong like driving goal to get me there, so I'm really kind of head down focused on finishing that crochet blanket. Yeah, so I cast on a second blanket. Yeah. No excuse. Squirrel! I mean, now, I know what you're thinking. What are you thinking? Because I'm not sure I know what I'm thinking. So if I knew what you were thinking and how you were reacting and responding to this, that might help me with what's... I have no idea. But I will tell you what, it's making me very happy. So yeah, there we go. Just to finish off talking about the granny stripe blanket, that I am crocheting on a 4mm hook. I think realistically I probably should have done it on a 3.5mm hook, but as it turns out the 4 is what I had. It means it's a little bit on the loose side. I will say that, you know, in hindsight I probably would have gone down a little bit. As it is, it's fine, and I'm really enjoying working on that. Yes, enjoying it so much that, as I say, I started a second blanket project, which makes no sense. I will say that you know, thankfully I have 2 people to blame in amongst all of this. One of those is Amy Florence, who is knitting all the rainbow blankets at the moment, and so, you know, using up minis and being super efficient, and I'm like, oh, I've got loads of minis, I should use those. So, you know, partly to blame, but also partly to blame is Kristen of the Woolenvine podcast, who mentioned on her last few episodes that she has been crocheting up the Blanket of Calm, and has also mentioned the Battenberg blanket by Sandra Paul, and it is this blanket that I have started to crochet. Now, if you're familiar with either of those, you will know that they consist of tiny, tiny crocheted squares, which are all linked together. And what I will say is the granny stripe blanket is wonderful. It's quite the beast to work on. You saw me trying to sort of, I was going to say manhandle it here. Let's say person handle it, shall we? You saw me trying to just gently foist it upon you. It is a bit of a beast to work with, and we're getting into warmer months. It's nice to have something a little bit kind of quick to work through without needing to shuffle things around on your lap the whole time when it's not the warmest, when it's not the coolest of weather. But also, I do think there is something to be said for the satisfaction and just kind of completer finisher element within me, which is very small but comes out every now and again. There is something to be said for finishing a square, and I do think at the moment where everything is batshit crazy at the moment. It's really, really nice to have the ability just to kind of work through something from start to finish and then put it to one side and know that you have achieved something in that day. There is a very, very instant gratification potato chippy, call it what you will, but kind of feel to this project. That may be something to do with the fact that I have crocheted about 120 squares in the last week. This is all of the squares that I have crammed into one tiny bowl. Yes, these are definitely going to need to be new sort of rehoused because, good lord, I am now well out of space within this bowl. But you can see there is quite the spectrum going on within here, and this is making my heart incredibly happy right now. I am going to pop one of these squares out just for you to see what it looks like. I know it breaks my heart to take it out of here, but it'll be fine, it'll be fine. This here is one of the squares. So you can see it is pretty diddy. In all honesty, we're talking about probably 2 inches by 2 inches, or sort of roughly 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. You can see here that it is fairly simple crochet. So with this, you are making this center circle, you're working the crochets into there and then working one final round from the outside as well. And yeah, all in all, you're coming up with this little diddy square. Now the Battenberg blanket has you work coloured squares in between plain or neutral colours, so you have a Battenberg cake effect, hence the name, and I'm really quite taken with that. That does mean it's an awful lot of white squares that I'm going to be working up, but you are also joining as you go when you work up the white squares, so I reckon that is going to be a much, much more kind of, again, gratifying way of working all of this up together. Up until now, as you may have guessed, I have been working pretty much exclusively on the coloured squares, but I do have some yarn that I will be starting to work up for the whites and joining as I go. And yeah, I was debating different patterns, potentially a little bit of a kind of spectrum or a fade that goes through it, to be super organised about it, because again, I like to be able to kind of place things and have a thought process behind what colours go where and not being too kind of random about it, because there will be always just one kind of glaring colour combination that makes me just ever so slightly. Not a perfectionist, just every now and again have mild tendencies in that direction. But I think what I might end up doing is starting to join some of these together a little bit more. Let's go with purposefully random, because that's about as random as I'm able to get. So yeah, I think I may start to work some of these up. In terms of the minis themselves, as I say, leftovers from advent calendars, from 20-gram skeins, from socks, from projects, pretty much everything that's gone into here. It's all sock yarn or sock yarn weight, so 4-ply fingering weight yarn. It's all kind of merino nylon blends, either 75-25 or in some instances it's 80-20, some of the high twist stuff. I really do enjoy working with 80-20 yarn. That's the high twist. That is the one that's slightly more rounded when you're working with it. The plies are a little bit harder to see. It just feels so much kind of, I want to say like cozier and satisfying to work with. I really do love an 80-20 high twist base. So there's a mixture of those in here as well. And yeah, might have made some purchases to go with it too, because I am clearly fully embracing pandemic brain, and this has just sent me over the edge a little bit. So that is where I'm at with my Battenberg blanket. I reckon, so I think in order to get the size that I want, we are talking about sort of 29 squares by 35 squares. I've gone for odd numbers because that means that I can have white at all of the corners, because yes, that is my particular brand of crazy. Nice to meet you. As part of that, that means about, I think I'm looking at about 1,015 squares. Now, given I've been able to do about 120 in a week without breaking too much of a sweat, it's still a long-term project, do not get me wrong, but as I say, the the crazy shows no sign of abating thus far. I'm really, really enjoying just the ability to pick up and crack out a square. I think I mentioned already, no, I didn't mention already, apologies. For this, I'm using a slightly smaller hook. I'm using a 3mm hook. And that is actually working out perfectly for the sock weight yarn. It is what's recommended in the pattern, because pattern designers, they know what they're talking about. And as part of that, I mean, my crochet isn't particularly great. I'm still very much learning. I can triple crochet fairly swiftly, but I do still need to look at it. This is not a project that I can sort of sit and just stare at the telly. This is one where I'm definitely kind of looking down, eyes in, and keeping an eye on what's going on. Otherwise, I will fuck it up quite badly. Thankfully, I haven't had too many mutant squares, but I definitely know that I need to be paying attention when I'm doing this, which again just adds to the really nice kind of feeling of satisfying and kind of achievement when you're going through and working on these. It is an awful lot of fun. So yeah, probably not what you were expecting when you tuned in this week. You know, sorrel pullovers, morning and Engelbergs, those are definitely going to be back at some point, but for now, please allow me to indulge a little bit in the crazy, and I promise we'll be back to your regular broadcasting very soon. Moving along into vicarious knitting this week, and I am going to extend that to vicarious crochet, because the first thing I'm going to tell you about are stash enhancements, and those stash enhancements are not entirely unrelated to the blankets. Yes, indeed, I picked up some minis. I showcased some yarn not last episode, the episode before? No, maybe last episode. I forget. Much like the days, the episodes, they blur into one. But I showcased some yarn a couple of weeks ago from a seller on Etsy who is Loom Wool. I bought some beautiful Suri alpaca silk from her with the intention of at some point making a pink velvet by Andrea Mowry. I had been following her on Instagram and spotted that she was releasing some new minis, and so on the basis of the fact that the colours, they are lovely, and B, they're on 80/20 sock yarn with the high twist, which is the sock yarn that I mentioned I really enjoy working with, I pounced and these had to be mine. So you can see here there are two bundles. I have mini skein bundle number 7 on this side here and number 6 over here. Number 6 is the neutrals. I believe number 6 sold out pretty quickly, but she is looking at getting some more of that onto the site in the not too distant future. But yes, these are absolutely beautiful. She dyes such really kind of wonderful colours, wonderful bases, and as I say, as someone who is relatively new to me, it's definitely a shop I'm enjoying keeping an eye on. So these, I think I'll be using a couple of them in the big granny striped blanket, but I will definitely be making use of them in the smaller Battenberg blanket as well. But the crazy, it does not stop there. No, indeed, because I also spotted another wonderful UK hand dyer who is Wild Rose Yarns, also on Etsy. She had mentioned that she had some mini skeins in there too, and her colours absolutely took my breath away. So there are a couple of bundles here. I'm trying to hold them in such a way that you can see some of these incredible colours, and they're just stunningly beautiful. So these here are her 10 by 10 gram skinny minis, and this is a mystery set that she sent over my way as well. So again, 10 by 10 grams, and these were the mystery colorways as opposed to the rainbow here. The camera is struggling to deal with some sunlight that has broken through from outside, so these are looking a little bit more day glow than you might otherwise expect, but the colours, I swear, they are entirely beautiful. These are all on her 75/25 merino nylon blend. They're all sock weight, and as you heard me mention, they're all 10 grams. There's a little bit too little in each of these to go into my main blanket with the granny stripes, but it's perfect for the Battenberg blanket. So, you know, again, just in case. Minis everywhere. Yeah, I've lost it, haven't I? But yes, absolutely adoring these colours and very much looking forward to working them up into little squares, because clearly that is my life now. You know, video calls and making tiny crocheted squares. It's a great substitute for, you know, going to the pub and meeting people in real life and having friends. It's fine. It's fine. Right, that is it for the crochet related content this week, I humbly promise you, because we're moving into vicarious knitting and some of the patterns that have caught my eye over the last couple of weeks. And as opposed to the blanket madness, these are all knitting related. Because my crochet skills are definitely not enough for me to consider much more than what's already been going on. The first of the patterns that's caught my eye this week is a really beautiful, quite unusual sweater. This is called the Halfway Sweater and it's by Jamie Hoffman. I'm going to put it up here on the screen for you to enjoy. As you can see, it's a really, really lovely idea. You have this panel down the front of the sweater, the top half of which is knitted in a lace weight yarn like kid silk mohair, and as such you just get a little peek of the kind of central section here, potentially a little bit of cleavage that you could be a little bit risque with, or indeed a vest top if you have that one underneath. And so it's just a really, really nice detail that adds quite a modern, quite a sort of geometric element to this sweater. In holding together that kid silk lace yarn with another fingering weight yarn as well, what you start to see is there's the kind of two-tone effect that you get. There's a lot of talk of kind of marling that you can do. The colour choices and the options that you have with the sweater become really, really interesting as well. I would definitely recommend you pop over and take a look at some of the finished items that have been made using this pattern, because there's such a strong range to them. The colours make such a huge difference as well, as does the styling in the way that you'd expect. It's a really, really versatile sweater that looks amazing on so many different bodies. Technique-wise, it sounds pretty fascinating. It is knit in the round, but with intarsia in there as well. And obviously, I haven't yet looked at the pattern in any detail. I can't go into detail about it. It is a paid-for pattern. I would not wish to. But at the same time, there's enough in there to make me genuinely quite intrigued. In terms of sizing, it does a really great job as well. It is knit to fit bust sizes from 28 up to 64 inches. And there is ease built into that as well that will allow you to have it fit in the way that the designer has styled it too. So it gives you quite a lot of flexibility in that regard as well. So yes, if that strikes your fancy, it is definitely a pattern that it's worth taking a look at. And as I mentioned, have a look at some of the patterns, the projects that have been completed on Instagram and on Ravelry, just for a little bit of extra inspiration, because again, love trawling through some of the test knits and some of the folks that have cast this on. It's always fantastic to see some of the variations that are out there. And the other pattern that caught my eye this week is actually a cowl pattern. Now, this could be partly because of my sadly cut short US trip. It could also be just the fact that I've got a bit of a thing for kind of a geometric shape that's going on at the moment. Clearly, the blanket squares are seeping into the insides of my brain, as well as the halfway sweater with its slightly kind of blocky and geometric look to it. But the Sunset Mesa cowl by Jennifer Berg really caught my eye this week as well. Jennifer has actually had a hat pattern that's been released in the new Making magazine, and seeing that, which again has this really strong, slightly geometric aesthetic to it, I was digging into some of her other patterns and other work when this caught my eye, and I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. Again, quite a strong, stark geometric pattern that's on there. Really like the use of the different colours that she's got in there, the sort of quite strong definition between the two, or distinction between the two, is really, really beautiful, and it just lends itself to a really kind of strong, impactful design on this cowl. So this is knit out of worsted weight yarn. I believe she's used Vicariously in this, but I reckon it could also be knit out of DK weight as well, and you would have a lovely snuggly cowl. And yes, fine, the fact that the contrast colour is gold may have something to do with why it instantly kind of leapt into my favourites. But at the same time, I'm just really, really here for her really quite bold patterns that she uses across her accessories range. And it's definitely a designer that is worth taking a look at if that's the sort of thing that floats your boat as well. But in addition to the things that have caught my eye, it's fair to say that you have been doing some fairly excellent excellent work as well. Thankfully, none of you have been quite so squirrel distracted by however many different blanket projects and mini skeins and so on seem to be coming your way. You seem to be doing a far better job of being monogamous and productive with your knits and general projects. So well done to you. And I do want to call out a couple of patterns here and projects here that caught my eye over the last few weeks. I mentioned up front we have the Knitting Vicariously podcast group over on Ravelry, and in there we have a few different threads, one of which is show us your actual knits. And I know I use the word knits. I do of course extend that to crochet, otherwise I would be excluding myself and my own projects from my own thread, which feels, you know, a little bit insensitive. But I would also say that we do have as well show us your vicarious knits for May, for April. We tend to have a monthly thread where you can go in and just essentially indulge in chatter about patterns that have caught your eye, combinations that you might want to aspire to casting on at some point, or indeed just sharing something that's made you very, very happy. So I have lifted a couple of, as I say, projects that caught my eye from the show us your actual knits thread this month. That is not to say that the projects I'm not mentioning aren't amazing. They are absolutely incredible, and again, if you're in search of inspiration, I would highly recommend you stop by that thread and give it a glance every few days, because just some of the work that you're doing and some of the things that you're creating are absolutely astonishing, and just I hope you're in love with every single one of them. The first project I'm going to talk about this time round is this beautiful sweater, which is trailing lace. This has been knit by D. Jelly Smith 2, and it is a beautiful, beautiful boxy pullover, and the designer is Kate Oates. Now, this is a pattern that I wasn't at all familiar with before seeing Donna's beautiful version, and so really, really enjoyed digging into and finding out a little bit more about the pattern itself. Donna's version is beautiful. It's this gorgeous kind of mid-blue colour that looks so stunning on her. It's knit absolutely perfectly. The sizing and the kind of fit on her is just beautiful, and similarly when it comes to looking at the pattern itself, it's a really, really fun looking pattern. So it's knit in DK weight, and as you can see, it's this kind of slightly boxier look to it overall. Finding a boxy sweater that is also knit from the top down is not always easy, but the good news is this is worked from the top down, and I believe the shoulders are worked seamlessly as well, so it's all done pretty much in the round too, which makes a massive, massive difference. Sizing wise, it is not too bad. I believe the smallest size is around about 41 inches up to about 66. However, it is intended to be worn with a fair bit of ease given that boxy shape. And so I think the ease, it goes up to about 10 inches, making the largest fit measurement probably around about 56-inch bust, just so you are aware. But a really, really lovely sweater on Donna there, and I hope you're enjoying wearing it. It looks absolutely beautiful. The second project that caught my eye is a pattern that should be fairly familiar with everyone now. Yes, indeed, the Love Note sweater has been around for a long old while, and pretty much everyone and their dogs have knit one at one point. Now, I am very much the exception to the rule at this point in time. I will say that I've contemplated it. I have definitely contemplated it. And this beautiful example by T Knit Pearl made me contemplate it even more. First of all, I love the way that she styled this with the sweater itself over a dress. It never occurs to me to wear sweaters over dresses. I don't wear too many dresses, I will confess that up front. But it's certainly, you know, a dress for me is almost a last resort in hot weather where just generally jeans are a no-go. So it's a really good styling choice, and one that I need to bear in mind more often. But she knit the most beautiful, beautiful version of the Love Note sweater in this just stunning green colourway, and it looks really, really phenomenal on her. As you may well be aware, this is another sweater where it is knit in fingering weight yarn held together with the lace weight mohair silk to give it a lovely fluffy texture. That being said, I'm sure there are plenty of examples out there that don't use the mohair if the mohair is not for you, so worth bearing that in mind for the future as well. But it is a fingering weight sweater. It is a fingering weight sweater where for the most part I've seen it knit with a number of different sleeve lengths, and it is intended to be quite cropped, so could be fairly economical on the yarn as well in terms of the amount of yardage that you need to complete the sweater itself. Now, the Love Note sweater by Tin Can Knits, one of the amazing thing about all Tin Can Knits patterns is their sizing, and this is part of the reason why this sweater has done so incredibly well. This is sized from a 24.5-inch bust all the way up to a 72.5-inch bust, and as such, size inclusivity just knows no bounds when it comes to the sweater. It is incredibly well done, and so definitely worth a look if you're in the market for a summer sweater and, like Tanya, you want something that perhaps works beautifully over a little summer dress, because that to me just feels like the best way of wearing this sweater, and I'm baffled that it didn't occur to me sooner. Now, a brief mention here of something that caught my eye, because this was by a group member who mentioned that this is her first sweater design, and this is the Attune sweater by Alison Cribbs. Yes, this is again a fantastic, quite graphical, quite bold colour choices and style, and I was going to say print, you know what I mean with knitting. It's not a print, but it's the kind of bold construction and colour combination that give it just quite a kind of statement look to it. I really, really love this sweater. So yes, Alison mentioned this is her first sweater design. She's had it in testing for a while now. I believe there are still a couple of sizes that she's looking for test knitters for, so if that's something that you want to take a look at, I'd urge you to pop on over to her Ravelry page. In terms of sizing, the range is fairly broad. She has it sized from a 34-inch all the way up to a 66-inch bust, and there are certainly a few sizes where she's still looking for testers, so if you do want to do so, as I say, I would urge you to pop over there and take a quick look. Looking at the tags on Alison's page, it looks as though this might be worked flat and then seamed. If that's your bag, again, one for you to bear in mind, or indeed if you're looking to try something a little bit different and you tend to knit more in the round, perhaps this is something that you want to get on board with. But either way, definitely worth a quick mention here, just because again, it combined that fantastic kind of quite statement bold aesthetic with the fact that it's a brand new design, and so definitely worth heading on over and taking a look at it and seeing if perhaps it's something you want to work on yourself. And purely because this made me go all gooey-eyed, I present to you the Dashing Dash Hunt. I mean, how could you not love this? This is Ravelry Group member Best and More Skills' fantastic project that she knit, presumably for her Tiny Dash Hunt, and it just brought me too much joy, because yes, there's a project that shows them side by side. There's also a picture that shows them cuddling, and that may have made me squeal at a pitch that my cat found deeply disturbing. The pattern itself is by Ella Austin. You can find out more about it over on Ravelry. I will link it below if you do wish to make a tiny dachshund. I will not judge you. If anything, I will support you to the ends of the earth, because tiny dachshunds for the win. And so there you have it. The content this week has been very much from the ridiculous to the sublime, but I hope that you will, you know, bear in mind the fact that it's a very, very different sort of time that we're dealing with here. So, you know, we're making allowances for people's mental states to be a little bit scattered, and perhaps, you know, we're focused on what makes us happy right now, as opposed to doing perhaps what we should be doing, or what we might have committed to be doing, or, you know, any of those things. So it's a very difficult time. Regardless of what it is that you're working on, I hope the period has been treating you well and it continues to do so. I am going to continue with my bizarre and completely unprecedented effort to make lots of tiny squares, because that's what seems to be bringing me joy at the moment, and I'm entirely okay with embracing that right now. If what is bringing you joy is either knitting, vicarious knitting, crocheting, calligraphying, baking, even if it's sourdough, it's fine. I don't judge you. You know, you do what makes you happy, and I'm quite sure that that'll be what gets us through this bizarre sort of time that we're dealing with right now. That aside, I hope the next few weeks treat you well. I will be back in the not too distant future, but in the meantime, I really do hope that you have a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting, your crocheting, your baking, all of these things are keeping you happy, and if for whatever reason they aren't, I hope you have the opportunity to do one or all of them vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will speak to you very, very soon. Bye. Okay. Yeah, there were totally people watching me from there. This is fine. What am I doing? You are not helping, Hubsy. Thank you, buddy. I know you came to rescue me from the crochet. I really appreciate it. Thank you. You're too kind. Too kind. See, even he knows that something is wrong. It's not right, is it, bud? No. Well, this is normal. What am I doing? American Beauty, the crochet version. It's the sequel that no one wanted.